Hey, I'm Vlad with GlobMarble, and I'm going to show you how to do a stamped concrete overlay. I've done one with slate, I've done one with random stone in some of my other videos, but today we're going to be stamping with our old brick pattern 4100. The first thing that needs to be done is the floor has to be prepped, meaning that it has to be grinded completely flat to remove any type of dust, debris, oils in your concrete surface, and to open up the pores of the concrete so that it's going to grab onto that overlay a lot better. Afterwards, any cracks, any holes inside of your concrete should be patched. This can be done with feather finish. It's a really easy thing to do. And after all that's been vacuumed up, there's no dust on the floor, we're gonna use SureBond, which is basically a primer that's gonna let the overlay properly bond to your old concrete surface and make sure that it doesn't chip off, doesn't delaminate, and all those nasty things. Today I'm not going to be working with concrete, I'm going to be working on a plywood board, but the technique is all going to be the same besides the prep. If you are going to be doing this stamped concrete overlay over a wooden floor, you have to make sure that there is no creaks when you walk on the floor. It doesn't dip down when you step on it. The floor has to be as sturdy as possible because any movement in that concrete is going to crack. Concrete does not have a very good flexural strength. Instead, what we're going to need to do for the wood prep is staple this steel mesh onto the plywood board. Again, we're doing this to make sure that the concrete and the plywood has a proper bond and it's not going to chip off. Then we go ahead and continue right next to it. If you did notice that I'm kind of hammering those staples in really close together, the reason for that is I'm trying to make sure that there's no peaks or high points that are going to be sticking up that will show through once we start stamping. I don't know if it's just my tool that does this, but this thing keeps jamming up, so I'm going to show you exactly how to fix that. If you see there's a hole right there, this is supposed to go up and down. We stick a screwdriver into there, hammer it a few times, and the jam opens up.
Так, с этими скобками. О.
And now we're just going to go ahead and trim off the excess with some wire cutters. Once we're done with that, before mixing up our stamp overlay material, we have to figure out what thickness that overlay is supposed to be. How you figure that out is you find the deepest point in the mold and then see the distance between that and the highest point in the mold, which is always going to be these grout lines. For this mold, the thickness is about 1/2 inch, so the overlay should be a little bit thicker than 1/2 inch. How we make sure we get an accurate thickness is we use something called a gauge rake. It has these adjustable sleds that you can move up and down basically, and then you tighten them at the thickness that you need. You're gonna drag it along and it's gonna make everything the same thickness. So now we're ready to mix our floor stamp mix, and the first step is always to add the water. The reason is because if you add the powder first, you're gonna have some powder stuck on the bottom and it's gonna be unmixed material. You're gonna have to mix it for a lot longer. It's just easier to start off by pouring in the water first. Basically, the bag says that it's 3.5 to 4 quarts per bag. I'm gonna be using 3.5. You can always add more water, you can't take any out. This is enough for 2.5 bags. That's what I'm using for this entire project. The next step is to add our color packs into the water. You want to do this so that the water is pigmented. You don't throw it in after everything's already mixed up, and you're going to have a lighter shade over here, a darker shade over here. It's going to be completely consistent throughout the entire job. We got a bunch of colors to choose from. A lot of really nice, vibrant colors like the blue fog, the mint, which we could achieve because the mix that we're using is white, and you wouldn't be able to achieve something as light as this coral with a great concrete. But today we're using our old brick molds, so we're gonna go with our old brick color pack. If you're gonna seal your job, it's 1 color pack per bag to get the color that you want. And since I'm using 2.5 bags, I really recommend using a scale, a very accurate scale, to measure exactly how much I need for the half bag. Now before I mix this up, I gotta mention that it's not only the pigment that you gotta measure carefully to make sure that you get a consistent color, it's also the water that you add into there. If you spilled out your first batch and you're mixing up a new one and you add more water or less water, you might see a difference in the colors. Now the next step is to add our floor stamp mix inside of the water, and the best way to do it is 1 bag at a time. Mix the bag thoroughly and then add your second bag. It just makes the whole job a lot easier. Now for the next step, we have to scrape the sides of the bucket because as you see, there's a lot of unmixed material right here. We gotta scrape those unmixed materials off and then mix 1 more time after that. I'm gonna get a bigger trowel. Now we're gonna go ahead and spill that mix out onto our floor. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna use a pool trowel to trowel everything, all these lines, make sure that it's completely nice and flat. Any type of hole or any type of imperfection in the surface will show up on the stamps after you stamp them, so make sure that it's as flat as possible. And now once that's all flattened out, we have to wait a little bit. You can't start stamping immediately. This concrete is still way too wet. I touch it and then you can see it gets left on my finger. I can't tell you the exact time of how long you have to wait because the conditions and the environment matter a lot in this case. The colder it is, the slower your concrete's gonna set. The hotter it is, the faster your concrete's gonna set. I'm working indoors, the heater is on, so it's not gonna take too long for me. It's not recommended to do concrete in the winter anyways, but if it is the summer and the sun is beaming down on it, you're working outside, this is gonna set up a lot quicker than it is for me. To show you guys how easy it is, we have the new girl Layla over here and she's gonna be doing the stamping. Let's get right to it. So first thing we're gonna need to do is spray GSR on both the concrete and on our stamps. It's our liquid release agent. If you don't use this, it's gonna stick onto your molds and it's gonna basically ruin the entire job. So it has to be sprayed on both the concrete and the molds. So we're starting off with our border stamps. We'll start off right in the very corner, and it's important to make sure that you take note of what side the border stamps you're using. So, for instance, right here, this grout line is on the opposite side as this grout line. So, we have to match it with the other mold. And you could walk on these to press the texture in, but we're going to be using a tamper to make sure that it completely imprints really well. Every once in a while we want to respray our stamps because that release could run out on the stamp, so just re-release it and then keep going. Meanwhile, while she's doing all that, I could go ahead behind her and start patching up these control joints that basically got squeezed concrete in between them. And now we're going to go ahead and use the big ones. And now we're going to go ahead and switch the color. The reason why we have multiple molds and multiple different colors is that these molds have different bricks. They were made from different bricks so that it's not a repetitive pattern that's going to be noticeable, that's going to look cheap. And so now if you notice, we do not have enough space to go over there, and we do not have enough space to go in between over here. That's where the flex mold comes in, which can bend into corners, into places that you don't want it to be stamped. So unfortunately, I did put too much material. I think just 2 bags would have been fine, not 2.5. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove some of that excess material, then spray the spots that I removed those on with some more release, and we're gonna continue. And so now you notice we have no texture right around over here on the sides. What's gonna fix that is our seamless skin. We place it on here, tap it very gently, and it textures with that brick texture. Now, once we got this thing looking like it actually looks nice, we're gonna leave it until tomorrow or maybe the day after, where I'm gonna show you what to do next. So I came back the next day, it looks great, but there's another step that we have to take, which is called acid washing. We're gonna be using SCR, which is a concentrated acid-based concrete degreaser. What it does is it basically removes all of that oil from that oil-based release agent that we were using. And it's also gonna open up the pores of the concrete, which is gonna make the stain look a lot more vibrant, and the sealer is gonna stick onto that concrete a lot better. The sealer is gonna last a lot longer before you have to reseal. You wouldn't have to do this if you were using the powder release, but I wasn't doing that because I'm indoors. That's gonna make a huge mess. And in general, I just prefer using the liquid release because it's easier to see where you have a problem area. If over here you don't like the way the texture is, you can always fix that. With the powder release, you're basically doing it blind. The benefits of powder release is that you don't have to use a stain. It's already going to give it some accenting in those deep points because the powder release is pigmented. So the SCR comes in different dilution rates. For regular concrete, it's a 2:1. For DFRC, it's 3:1, but for overlays, what we have right here, it's a 4:1 ratio. So I already have the water in here. I'm gonna pour my SCR in to the amount that I need. It's actually a very pleasant smelling, I don't know how to describe it, but it smells really nice. And then we have to go ahead and hose down our overlay. The reason for this is because if you use it just straight onto the dry concrete, the acid is gonna be way too powerful. It's gonna take off a lot of that color, and it's basically gonna etch it a little bit too much. You might rub off some of that texture that you like. So you should always be using the SCR on a completely wet slab. So if you see it drying out, just hit it with a hose again, and then you got nothing to worry about. Next, I'm gonna go ahead and pour it out onto the area I'm working at. You see how it's working right there? The color's already starting to fade a little bit. That's fine, don't worry, it's not gonna stay that bright. Then I'm gonna go ahead and just clean it up with a thick bristle broom. Then after we're done, we wash off all that SCR and we're good to go. And now we're just gonna go ahead and wait for this to dry out. So now the next step is we're gonna start using our stain. It's a water-based stain called Eco Stain, which is a lot better in my opinion than acid-based stains because they're a lot more forgiving to work with. If you make a mistake or if you don't like the way something looks, you can always touch it up afterwards. I'm gonna be using the color Espresso. Just like the SCR, the Eco Stain is a concentrate. It's 32 ounces, but it stretches out to a gallon, so 3 parts water to 1 part SCR. This is just to match the color on the color chart. So if you want to make it any lighter, you can always add more water. If you want to make it darker, you can add less. I'm going to start staining the borders first, and I want the borders to be a lot more light than the center on the inside right here. So I'm going to take a risk and see what the Eco Stain looks completely uncut on those borders. So now I'm going to go ahead and pour this into a pump sprayer. Now before actually spraying onto our board, I'm going to spray on the outside to get all the residue out. And I'm going to go ahead and use a piece of cardboard to make sure that I have a clear separation between this color and that color. And now I'm going to dilute the stain to the manufacturer's recommendation for the middle It's a 3-to-1 ratio. I just took a look at it. I want to dilute it with a little bit more water because there's not much of a difference between this one and this one. Now it's going to be a 1 to 6 part ratio. Now, just so you know, I am going to be sealing this, which means that once it dries out, the color is going to fade a lot. It's going to become a lot lighter. It's not going to stay that light. It's almost going to look as if it's wet because the sealer is essentially just a liquid that hardens over onto your concrete, leaving a permanent wet color to it. So the best way to figure out whether you like it or not is right now while it's still wet instead of afterwards when it's dry, because it will end up looking different. I do want to do some touch-ups on it. I want to get the dark color off of the tips and down into the deep points on the very dark areas. So I'm just going to wait for this to dry up, make sure the pigment gets completely absorbed into there, and then I'm going to touch it up with some water. Now once this more or less dried out, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to alter some of this stuff. It's too dark here, too light here, and so I'm going to move around this stain to my liking. I want to grab a wet sponge, and it doesn't have to be extremely wet, just damp. Make sure that it doesn't drip. That's the way I like to do it. Start moving it around. Being careful to only do the middle first, and then I'm going to move on to the sides, because the middle is way less concentrated. If I start off on the sides, go in the middle, all this pigment is going to go onto the middle, and it's not going to look good. And you can see how there's a difference between the water that's running down into the low points and the parts that haven't been pigmented yet. That's what I'm trying to do. I want to make those grout lines very dark and the deep points on these stones very dark, but keep everything more or less that brick red color. Now we're ready to put on our sealer, and what a sealer does is it makes sure to protect the color. This is water-based. You saw that I was moving it around with water, so we need to seal that in so that doesn't fade, and also to protect your concrete from scratch resistance and all that type of stuff. I'm going to be using an acrylic sealer called HS200. I like acrylic sealers because they're pretty durable, they're UV resistant, which a lot of sealers aren't, and they're relatively inexpensive compared to other sealers. HS200 comes in a gloss finish, but I really don't think that these old bricks are going to look nice with the gloss finish like most of my other stamped concrete overlay projects and videos I do. So what I'm going to do is add something called a matting additive. So on one side over here we have the glossy HS200, and on the other side we have the matting additive. I like that one way better. The HS200 is a one-component system, so there's no part A or part B. You just take it straight out of the bucket and you apply it. But with our matting agent, you can add up to 5 scoops per gallon. I did a little bit of math. I'm only using 600 milliliters. A little bit of math and a little bit of weighing with the scale. This is the amount that I need to use with the 600 milliliters. You could use a sealer sprayer to put on this sealer, but I'm gonna use a 6-inch foam roller. I like them because They dip into the grooves, the really deep points, way better than a nap roller. So I'm just gonna go ahead and spill it out and then start working it into the surface. Also, I forgot to mention that you really have to make sure that your entire concrete is dry, because if it's not, what's gonna end up happening is that the moisture has to escape somewhere, the sealer is gonna completely cure, and then the moisture is gonna start breaking out from the top of that sealer, and you're definitely gonna see some type of flaking or bubbling. It's just gonna be really, really ugly. If you're doing a freshly poured slab, usually they have to wait like 32 days, but since this is an overlay, you can wait anywhere from like 3 to 7 days. Now, if you notice, I'm not rolling entirely in one direction. I'm going both this way, sometimes horizontal. What this does, it's called back rolling, and what it does is it makes sure that it removes a lot of roller marks, so you're not gonna see where that roller was. It's gonna look very natural. And also, it just basically guarantees a equal distribution of the sealer everywhere, so you don't have any puddles, any pools. It just makes it all nice and even. So I just finished my first coating. I'm not going to be doing a second coating, but if you are actually going to be using this as a floor, I do recommend doing that. This is just going to be standing up against the wall. It's not actually going to be on the floor, so I'm not going to be bothering with the second coat. It still looks a little bit glossy, but that gloss fades as it cures, and I'm going to show you what it looks like tomorrow. So here we are the next day. This is what it looks like. Nice and matte. I'm going to show you guys a few different angles. And just for reference, this is what it looks like with the lights off. So you've made it to the end of my video, but now I want to ask you for a quick favor. See, the YouTube algorithm gets tricked into showing my video to a lot more people if a lot of people comment on it. So criticize me, praise me, or just ask a question. As long as you leave a comment, I'm gonna appreciate it a lot. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.